All
Hey
good.
guys, just want to welcome you to Hardball Chats. I'm Simon McPhee. I've come off the bench today because Connie's busy, and we're very lucky to have a special guest, Dale Robinson. So hi Dale, nice to
Hi guys.
nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Dale's current senior coach at VFLW team Southern Saints, but I'm just going to go through quickly a bit of Dale's background, and then we'll just start having a chat. Began a coaching career at VU Western Spurs, VFLW team as one of the backline coaches at the Bulldogs, AFLW development coach. We'll definitely come back to that. So started at Southern Saints as a senior assistant, eventually taking over as the head coach, and taking the reins of VFLW, Southern Saints, and obviously working with the Saints AFLW program. So that's pretty extensive coaching experience. Dale, been through some different stages of development there. Game's changed a bit in your time, has it?
It's changed quite a bit in my time because I've been lucky enough to have been in women's football for 20 years and, started in the playing side of things, when there was the old 3 divisions in women's football and to where it is today, the growth, not only from a playing perspective, but from all of the off-field side of things has been really exciting and just huge for the game.
Yeah, it really has been. I was lucky enough to have a bit to do with Peter Searle, and we can talk about her later on. But just the way the game's developed tactically, athletically, training, all that stuff, I imagine has come a long way since you started.
Yeah, I think for the girls, just around that, it's still such a learning curve because that part of it has always been sort of ad hoc. That girls might have done some of that in their spare time, but now getting to that semi-elite level, both at the VFL level and especially at the AFLW level, and having access to those sort of resources and understanding what goes into it, it's definitely changed the landscape.
And with that, because as I say, it's sort of happened quite. I know it's been happening for a while, but it's sort of happened quite quickly. What's next, do you think, with regards to the steps of development in the women's game?
There's still so much to come. So you're still at a stage now that you're working towards, hopefully in the next 10 years, that you're at sort of more of a, or close to a full-time capacity of elite athletes. But the game itself is still evolving so much, and it changes each year just as the girls get more opportunity to get more pre-seasons into them and get more games at that level. And it's exciting to watch. For me, it takes you back a little bit to old school footy and that real contest footy that we probably don't see so much in the men's game now. But it's also really brought families back to the game. So there's a lot of aspects of the game that I think appeal to a lot of people across all ranges that might not be as au fait with the men's game as it stands these days.
No, and that's a pretty valid point, I reckon, because the men's game is at such a level where it's almost sterile at AFL footy, isn't it? And being able to go to footy where it's a bit more real, I guess, and you can sit on the park with your kids or your family and watch it. I think there's a fair element of truth in that, and I think about when you talk about the contest side of things. It was never more evident early on, was it? I mean, the game was probably as well known for its contest than anything else in those first couple of years, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people that hadn't seen a lot of women's football, I think the physical contest and just how hard the girls go at the ball was a real eye-opener. And a lot of people sort of sat back and went, wow, these girls really want to be out there and really go hard at it. And I remember some of the faces of people that hadn't watched it before. I was going, wow, I'm glad I'm not out there because those girls hit hard.
Yeah, that was almost reckless, wasn't it? It was phenomenal. And look, I guess that leads me to another question just with regards to the game and its evolution. We were just talking, off air, for want of a better word, about, I was coaching a school football team. And obviously, when you don't have the time, like we talk about the AFL program and where you go tactically, we don't have the time to be able to spend all the time on tactics and training. So are you taking sort of snippets of AFL programs and trying to balance, the tactics with your time and skill development? I mean, how does that all work?
We definitely do, and you take away, sort of a lot of the learnings from that. But the way that I coach is always around, your game day strategy is only ever as good as your execution of skill. So we really focus on that skill fundamentals and making sure that we're getting those things right. Because if you're not hitting the most basic of targets, you can have the best strategy in the world, but it's not going to look any good when you can't go from A to B. So we really focus on making sure that we're spending that time on that execution, getting those fundamentals right. And from there, you keep building that game plan off those fundamentals.
Yeah, look, it's funny. Someone once explained high performance to me, and it made perfect sense. It was your ability to execute your fundamentals under pressure, and
Correct.
and that's essentially it, isn't it? And,
Yep.
and the other thing someone said to me once was structure is just a place where you start playing footy. So,
Yep.
you get. I imagine you'd be the same with young players coming through. They get overwhelmed if you throw too much at them, can't they?
Yeah, and we always talk about structure as basically your guideline. It might be your starting point, and then you go and play football.
Yeah.
And from there, you've got certain things that you'll work on during the week and the way that you'd like to see the game played. So you'll have a bit of structure around that. But at the same, footy's a game of mistakes. So it's about making sure that at the end of the day, you've probably got the least mistakes on the board to win the game.
Yeah, and you don't live in that mistake for too long.
No.
Coaching is we've got a few coaches on here now, and it's a bug, I reckon. I know it got me. You've obviously got a passion for it, and lead you to where you are today. Can you talk us through a little bit of your coaching journey and maybe some of the things that really helped you, and maybe some of the obstacles that you encountered on the way through?
Absolutely. So I've actually kind of covered all aspects of the game. So I've gone from playing into umpiring, and then into coaching. And I got to a point where footy's given me so much, and I played a lot of basketball and netball at high levels growing up, and was able to do bits and pieces of coaching through those sports. But footy was one of those sports that just always had that extra. And it was an interesting day when I realised as a kid that I would never be able to take that to the top level as a player. But finding footy as an adult through the women's league and being able to sort of still live out a lot of the things I wanted to as a kid was pretty exciting. And to get to the point where I still wanted to give back and know that coaching was probably that next step. I took that chance to go back to the team that I had worked with and the club that I'd worked with in the Spurs, and worked with Debbie Lee across there, who's been a stalwart of the women's game, and had the opportunity to start building that also into the Bulldogs game, as that was the second year in for AFLW before I had the opportunity to come across and work with Peter Searle at the Saints as we built our VFL program from the ground up, knowing that within a couple of years we'd be building into our AFLW program. And to have that opportunity and to work with Pete and look at still working with people that I'd played against and knew the history of through the women's game, to be able to develop that, but then also start sort of carving my own values and the way that I see the game on top of that. It's been a great journey, and to, this year take over as head coach at the Southern Saints. A couple of years ago, I'd be like, we'll look at those sort of things in a few years. And I think as a female coach, it's very easy for us to often sit back and go, well, if we don't tick off every box, we're not quite ready. And sometimes we realise that we're actually more ready than we believe. And part of that's the learning on the job, like any job, to get in there and have a go. And that's where I was at, and knew that I was probably at a stage where I was ready to take that on last year or this year. And it's been a huge growth year just in that, but a very, very exciting year, and looking forward to consolidating that again this year.
Yeah, it's a interesting scenario, isn't it, when you're coaching? And again, it'd be interesting to get the thoughts of some of the people that are on listening tonight. With the coaching, it's amazing what you know. And quite often, I think I've found the hardest thing as a coach is articulating what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until you get to those higher levels that you think, oh wow, I'm not that far off here. I actually know that. There's a lot of stuff that you know, But I think sometimes you just need a little direction, don't you, to be able to sort of get it out of yourself.
Absolutely. And I've been lucky enough to have done my level 3 this year, and that's probably been one of those moments for me of recognising that whilst I might not be the most technical coach out there, and that's fine, that's why I have other people around me to help with that, one of my points of difference is really around my communication and the way that I build relationships and the way that I build culture, so that we have that real connection and care through our group, that the girls want to be there. They want to play not only for themselves, but want to play for you and the club. And that can often be more important than the technical side, because that'll come with it as you work together.
Well, that's one of the strengths of being a good coach is knowing what you're good at, and knowing more, just as importantly, knowing what you're not good at. And, I think it's really interesting you say that, because I'm pretty sure, and I'd stand corrected, Cale, you've been on every one, that every single coach that we've had on, including myself, their number one is the care and communication and relationships. I remember when I first started coaching, I was coaching under 18s back in Perth, and a lot of the guys had come straight out of the AFL into those under 18s jobs, and they didn't care, and they didn't last, because it didn't matter what they knew, because they didn't connect. So,
no. And you've probably seen the evolution of that, especially through the men's coaches over the years, to start recognising the need for it. Whereas I would think the intuition, I think for some of us is in the female game, it's probably been there for a little bit longer, knowing that that's what's really needed to get from the ground up.
Yeah, I would agree totally with that, and I think coaches now are in a quite a lucky space with older, coaches around that 40-year-old, 50-year-old coach who still have that that ability to know what it's like when it was old school and hard, but understand you can't get to that unless you have the relationship part first. We've got a question from Dominic, and it's a simple question, but it's a good question. What does culture mean to you?
That's a pretty simple one. So my number one value is communication. So I highly value good communication. I always say that if something comes as a surprise to someone, whether it's a player or another coach, then you've failed somewhere in your communication. And so I'm very much about open and honest conversations to know, so everyone knows exactly where they're at, and that nothing's ever a surprise. So I got to the end of the season this year, and we sit down for our exit interviews, for example, and I only had 3 girls that were going to be delisted for the season, but that didn't come as a surprise to any of them, because we've had those conversations consistently across the year of what they're working on and knowing exactly where they stood. And I see both sides of that with other stories and things that I hear from some of the girls, and for me that's number one. You've got to have that communication right, and the second part of that is building a safe space, because the girls have to have a safe space to go to work, to make mistakes, to learn from them. So we talk about it being a game of mistakes, and that's where you take your risk to try things. If you make a mistake, it's about your next step and how you move on from that and learn from it. I always say if you make the same mistake over and over, we might be having a slightly different conversation. But if you're making that mistake and you're learning from it, that's how you learn the game. That's how you evolve and grow.
Yeah, look, there's one thing that really springs to mind, and I don't like being personal on this show, but my wife's got a saying which she uses on me quite often is, Simon, even rats learn. So that's me. That's me. That's me making the same mistake over and over again. You talked about building a safe space. What does that look like? How does that happen?
That really happens from building relationships. So one of the things that you can't underestimate is those fireside chats, or those early locker room chats when someone's early to training and you're sitting there talking about their day, and you're just building that rapport and that relationship, so that you might be talking about different things, and each time you have that conversation, they might go that little bit deeper, but they know that conversation they have with you, that you're invested in that conversation, and you're actually focused in with them. You're not looking for the next person that walks in the door. And it was funny, we as part of the start of our level 3 last year, we had to get some feedback from different people, and it was around what they saw of you, basically when you're being observed without notice. And one of the pieces of feedback that came to me was that from one of my operations guys was, he said, I really I see the way that you communicate and that you actually spend the time with every player and that you are genuinely invested in that conversation. And, I've had a lot of conversations with people looking at lists and looking at changes of girls coming across and that for our next season. And one of the things that I always talk to is that whether you're number 1 on my list or you're number 30 on my list, you might be playing every week or you might be lucky to play one game in the season, but every single player on that list will have the same amount of time with me across the season. And that's part of my investment into them as people, because I always look at the person first, the athlete second. You'll always get more out of the athlete when you spend time building that relationship with the person.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I had a conversation. I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with Adam Simpson, the West Coast coach, about this not more than a month ago. And whilst you made the point that I made the point that on this show every coach has talked about relationships and care and all that stuff. There's layers to that. There's levels to that, because it's really easy to say. It's harder to do because you've got to find the time. And I think if you've got the skill, and I would call it a gift, to make people feel that, like when you're talking to them, that they're the only one that you're talking to, that sets people apart. So if you've got that, that's a pretty good skill to have, I reckon.
Yeah.
Just with another question from me, and guys, just flick them through any questions you have, because it's great to hear from you guys. With the experience you've been through, what is there enough to support female coaches? Because there's been a bit in the press, hasn't there, about men coaching AFLW clubs, lots of men coaching them. What do we need to do to change it, apart from the decision-making process at the top, because that's an obvious one? What else do you think needs to be done, and is there enough support for girls coming through to coach?
There's some fantastic pathways in the system now, and the Female Coaching Academy, which I've been a part of this year, we had 8 coaches doing our level 3 together. I think there's 15 going through the next iteration of it nationally. And then you've also got the state league level. At St Kilda, we're just starting the St Kilda Female Coaching Academy. So there's 15 coaches that have been accepted into that will do their level 2 through that this year as well. And the She Can Coach program, which was started with AFL Victoria a few years ago, and I was one of the inaugural members of that, is also another one that's really starting to get to the reaches of our local coaches as well. So there's some great programs and that around. And it's a matter of, I think, as I said before, with females, sometimes it's putting your hand up and saying, I'm here, I want to be involved. And one of the big lessons I learned in the last 2 years is that we often sit back and wait to be re-invited. So if we get invited to something or to spend time with someone, and I spent some time with one of the senior coaches at the Saints last year, in 2019, and he said to me, happy for you to contact me anytime, spend time, come and do some more. And it was, then I sort of sat back and waited for that formal invitation. And one of the things I learnt was that if people say that they're willing to give you their time, they're genuinely willing to invest in you, and you've got to then go and be really proactive around it. And that's one of the things that I really talk to a lot of the female coaches now is don't be afraid to ask, because people will actually put their time into you because you're genuinely worth that time.
Yeah, it's a great point, because everyone gets busy in footy. Doesn't matter where you're at, but particularly at AFL level, people are really busy, and people will say that, and then they won't think about it again because they've got so much to do. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? You snooze, you lose. If you're going to wait for somebody to hand you a career, it's not going to happen. So that's really good advice, and it actually sounds like there's some pretty exciting stuff happening in the girls' space from a coaching development point of view. The She Can Coach program, because the one that a lot of the players do is Next Coach. Is that similar to that? Is that sort of?
I think it does. It's specifically more for females. So when it first started, it was sort of around the girls that were at the more senior level, through probably your VFLWs and your AFLWs, to sort of get that cohort going through and put some good mentorship around other professionals in the business and even in other sports, and start looking at utilising those links. And then it's started to develop at those next levels. So starting getting through your pathways, and then starting to get through some of your senior local coaches. So it's really starting to try and broaden its reach across, female coaches coming in at many different levels. And the other thing was that there are some really great senior women's coaches coming through, and there's quite a few in the AFLW pathways at the moment in terms of development coaches and assistant coaches, and there are female coaches that are ready to take that next step in the even now and in the next couple of years. So I think sometimes what we forget is that whilst there've been some great female coaches around for a while, that next level and probably the volume of those coaches coming through that are really ready for those senior roles are coming through now and will be ready. And it's kind of that catch-up mode that we haven't had the time in the game and the opportunities at the same training and coaching and learning levels, but that'll come through very closely in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and you also think the more, I mean, it's awful to say this, but the more money it generates, the more people go full time, the more coaches you'll need. So you would think those opportunities at some point will broaden, won't they? It sounds like there could be some serious competition for the jobs that are available, though.
Absolutely.
Got a question for you regarding AFLW and VFLW.
Yep.
What are the synergies there? Like, I mean, I must admit, I've been away from the sort of professional footy scene for a little while, and they're different seasons. Yep. So
slightly.
Have you got the same issues that perhaps I would have had coaching Sandringham in the day? All those. Can you talk us through the relationship and maybe some of the things you have to deal with? Being involved in both programs.
Absolutely. So, in terms of being involved in both programs, I now that VFL sort of kicked off, I have more limited time with the AFLW girls. But a massive part for me of the synergies of the program is ensuring that we're working together, and a lot of that is ensuring that we're sort of playing the same brand of football as well, so that the girls that potentially come down and play with us at VFL level, it's ensuring that they're giving the opportunities to be at their best to put themselves up for selection every week, and they're also bringing something to the VFLW program. Last year we had was the first year of the real two standalones, because we were still the VFL side going into AFLW in 2019, and a lot of those girls were being contracted through, whereas last year it was those two standalone sides working side by side. And for me, it's super important to make sure that communication and that connection between the two is really strong, because we have a great opportunity of not only supporting the AFLW program and what it's trying to do over a limited season, but also looking at bringing what they can take into the VFL program to bring that up to the next level as well. So there's got to be really good relationship building between those, and we do have that. And this year again, even with the change of personnel at the Saints, we're making sure that that's really strong, both through the playing group and the coaching group, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm keen to ask you about some of those coaches in a minute, but I've just got a question from Shane. For grassroots women's football, which you've been involved in from the ground up, what are the most important on-field structures that you would work on? So, probably if you're coaching club footy now, what are you focusing on, do you think?
I always go back to fundamentals as the first off. So I don't think you can put enough time into skills and craft and getting those fundamentals right. And then you start looking at the connection. You might look at your mids to forwards connection. You'll look at your connection out of your back line. And one of the things that I did last year, which I'll do a little bit more of this year, is you get your groups working in their lines, but sometimes it's great to send one line to another so that they get a really good understanding of the education side of that line, and then how they connect through to them. As you might send the forwards to the backs, for example, and you start having a look at the flow of the game coming out of the back line and how it resonates to them in the forward line. And same with the mids, and all of a sudden they start to understand the pressure that the mids might be under in terms of that execution into the forward line. So I don't think you can underestimate that education, so that they might be working well in terms of their line, but knowing what that connection is through the lines, we found really important last year. And it was something that the girls said, we want more of that. We really want to understand that. And what we saw in our last few games of the year was a huge turnaround, because they were understanding what was happening through that connection and really trying to allow for it.
That's a really valid point. And Shane, I hope that answers your question, but it was even at the over the highest level in the AFL men's program, it is staggering how often they'll blame each other and the lack of synergy and connection. So that is I've learned something today. I reckon that's a great point. Okay, so let's get to the nitty gritty. Sorry, we're getting personal now. You've been able to work with obviously lots of great coaches, and you have mentioned Debbie Lee. You've mentioned Peter Searle. I know you're going to work with Dell, who's a fantastic bloke. Could you talk us through some of those people that have had an impact on you, positive or negative? Because you learn, obviously, you can learn from both good and bad, can't you? Some of the people that have influenced you and what you've taken away from them.
I think there's something that you take away and you learn from every coach. So Debbie was fantastic to work with, and we really balanced each other well, because whilst Deb had a great football knowledge and was very passionate, there were times where I could just be that real calming influence for her as well. And that's probably one of the strengths that I take to game day, is that I'm generally pretty calm, even if things aren't necessarily going the right way out on the field. And Pete, I wouldn't be where I am without Pete. She has a phenomenal knowledge of the game and the way that she sees the game so quickly. You don't see in many coaches, male or female. She's just got an innate understanding of the game. And I think, the way that she was able to challenge me, both in the box on game day and then at training to learn and to get better, was a huge part of why I am in the position that I am now, and I'll be forever grateful for the opportunity that she provided me with that. And and then I'm seeing some great things from Nikki Dell and Paddy Hill's one that I really want to mention as well. So Paddy's he's been a part of our program at the Saints for the last couple of years, and he initially came in as the head coach of the VFL role, whilst also being in the forward line position with the AFLW, and just his experience over time, the way that he sees the game, the way that he sees the strategy of it. I've learned a lot from him in the last 18 months as well, and I still continue to use a lot of mentoring work with him, and he will be a big part of that support to Dell from an AFLW perspective this year, in terms of our head of development and strategy that he's working through in the coaching group. But there've been some great influences there, and he's been one that I really look up to in the last 18 months as well.
Yeah, that's great. It is a journey, isn't it? And once again, it applies to people coaching at clubland as well, and all those courses. You can't do enough of them, and I think even and I know it's hard with local coaches, but even if the content of the course you go to isn't great, there'll be someone there that you'll be able to learn off, and they might be coaching, muck and budding under 18s, but they do something that, that you've never seen before. So that's that learning, open growth mindset that's so critical to taking your coaching to the next level, isn't it?
Absolutely. I often say with courses, if you take 2 or 3 things away from any course, then it's actually been a success, because there's always so much to take away. But if there's 1 or 2 or even 3 small things that you take out that can be a part of what you put into the next level of your journey, then you're taking something good away.
All right, Dale, look, I know I could talk forever about footy, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I've got one last one, unless anybody else jumps in. What's next for you? I mean, what do you see? Where do you see yourself in 3 years' time from a coaching perspective, or where would you like to be?
I at the moment, I love where I'm at in terms of that next level of development and really helping that next level of elite footballers come through and develop in a really safe space. Ideally, I have aspirations at AFLW level to potentially go into that head coaching type role. And it's, I think, a matter of sort of working through what that looks like and a good fit, and sort of taking that next step as it progresses. But with the work that I'm doing now and the work across the programs, I'm in a great space to continue learning, and we'll look at the opportunities that come ahead. But that's probably the ultimate goal.
I hope you get there, and we'll be able to watch with interest over the next few years, and hopefully see you on TV in the next few months with the AFLW team. So, look, Dale, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and good luck to you in the future.
No worries. Thanks so much, Simon. Great to be here.
Yeah, you too. Take care, Dale.
Thanks very much.
I got one more question, sorry.
Yep, Kale, go for it.
just with, I know we sort of touched on the development of female coaches and that, but do you think there's enough being done in terms of the development of the players, like enough, invested in grassroots women's football? Yeah.
That's a great question, and one that I see. So it's been an interesting journey. So obviously when we started in the Women's League, it was under one banner. It was run as an independent league outside of AFL Victoria, and it was run very well in that respect. So you essentially had your 3 divisions, and I think it went to about 4 at one stage. You had your Premier and then your 3 divisions under it. And when it eventually came across to AFL Vic, which was what was needed in terms of the next part of the journey to keep growing the game, it came across sort of in that format with the Premier side, which is eventually what we now know as the VFLW. And the grassroots footy was then sort of farmed out to all of the existing community leagues in the way that they were set up for the men's. And it's been an interesting journey watching that, because the levels change quite significantly across different leagues through different clubs. So some of the existing clubs that were part of the original Women's League, and then you've got your existing local leagues that have then embraced the women's side and looking at developing their own women's teams. And I think there's still quite a bit of investment that needs to go in that from an infrastructure perspective to make sure that they've got the right facilities and everything to cater for both their men's and women's teams, and then also looking at the resourcing around making sure that there is enough that goes across the entire club. So I think there's probably an imbalance across the different leagues of what that can look like. Some clubs do it really well. Some clubs find that it's hard to spread the resources across. But I'd like to see that over time absolutely get to a better balance.
Yep, no, perfect.
All right. That's it. Let's go.
Anyone else got anything? All good?
No. Thanks, Dale. We appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on, Dale.
Thanks so much, guys.
Are you there, Dale?
Yeah, Shane, I just saw your message. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
mate.
I've been watching you on Insta. You're doing really well.
Thank you very much. I did recognise you with your red heel top.
Well, I've gone to Mornington now, so I'm changing teams. But yeah, keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the support.
No worries. See you later.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Have a great night.
You too.